Bienvenido. If you are able, please share this show with a friend, leave us a nice review on the podcast player of your choice, or if you'd like to support us financially, sign up for the companion podcast, The St. Nicholas Project, on Gum Road. All these things really help us out. Namaste.
Hello, friend. The Mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Ricky was ill, but he's home with the flu. Lizzie, our O, had some homework to do. Mitchell, E, probably got lost on the way. So I'm all the love that could make it today.
Good morning, everybody. You'll probably notice that the voice you just heard reading a delightful poem is not our Sumo, but it is, in fact, the illustrious number 15, CEO of Earth. Welcome. Good morning, number 15.
Good morning. I'm here to share my side of the story of all of my discussions with Sumo.
That's right. Number 15 is sitting in for Sumo as he is out wandering the desert and praying and eating scorpions this weekend.
I told him to go on a holy walk.
Yeah, which is good advice.
He needed it.
Yeah, which is great advice. So you're going to get to like defend yourself because you've been getting ripped a little bit on the show.
Yeah. I mean, every now and then I'll listen to the show. I love the show. You are doing such a great job of it. I'm learning new things, expanding my mind, opening my third eye.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, every now and then I hear him just kind of drop a little blurb in there about number 15. And the fact that I apparently on the last episode, I terrified him so much about the coronavirus that, you know, he's black pilled himself. And we talked. I was like, buddy, you need to go holy walk a little bit.
Yep.
Do some grounding, get those negative vibes, send them back into the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to come in, defend myself today, and we're going to talk about happiness. We need to swallow some white pills.
Excellent.
You know, I've been pissing black pills a little too much myself lately, and I'm like, we need some light in this world, in this dark world. There's a lot of darkness in it. So we're going to talk about the good things that are going on in the world, and then we're going to talk about how to be happy and how to make it through all of this.
Fantastic. The happiness show. I love it.
The happy show.
So before we get into the happiness, I would like to do a little housekeeping, and we got some special messages for some folks. First up, I'd like to thank the folks at ACR. That would be Hesher and Spore proprietors, and Ruckus, commander of doing all the things. They syndicate our show. I don't know if most of our listeners know that, but ACR, Alternate Current Radio, syndicates our show on their network, for which we are very thankful. And in fact, they are very nice people too. And Spore sent me a very cool T-shirt this week that has a baby smoking a cigarette and a giant chicken on it. That's the marquee T-shirt for their Boiler Room show. So thank you, Spore, for sending that. That was very nice. So everybody go to alternatecurrentradio.com and check out their great shows, including one of my favorites that they produce is the Sunday Wire, the program of Mr. Patrick Henningsen, who I think he's been out of commission for a little while. So Patrick, I hope you're feeling better, buddy. I look forward to hearing you on the air again real soon. And we also have a little mailbag.
Mailbag.
We got mailbag. This one's from Slightly Harmless, and she asks about Saint Christopher coming from a race of dog-headed giants. And she has seen in exploring the Italian Alps the oldest depiction of Saint Christopher, and he does actually have a giant dog head in that depiction in an old church in the Italian Alps. So we actually have covered that on our show, Slightly Harmless. I can't remember which episode it is, but it's on back there. Maybe if I can find the episode, I'll put it in the show notes.
That was a great episode. I'm curious. I wonder if the dog head is like, the Saint Bernards that had like, they were known to like go rescue people, and they had the big barrels of, I don't know, was that wine underneath their?
I think it was
their
like
necks,
I think it was like rum.
People into the
Yeah.
I could see that. I could see how that could play into it somehow. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I bet I like to picture him as a Saint Bernard with a big floppy mouth and drool, coming down.
Mm-hmm.
You know how they run and their face flops up and down?
Yes,
that's how I always think.
Old movie Beethoven. I think that was the name of that film.
Yeah,
our childhood film that of the lovable dog that destroys the house.
Yep.
Of the family.
Yeah, who played the dad in that show? He was like this angry guy.
I don't know. Like Sumo, I'm terrible with names of actors and actresses.
That was the guy from Three's Company, I think. I'm not sure about that. But no, that was a great movie. You young kids need to watch Beethoven. There was during the 80s and 90s, there was a big slam of like family fun movies. What would you call that genre? Yeah. It was like family fun movies. So Home Alone.
Problem Child was of that era as well.
Yeah. Do you remember Carpool? That was a great one.
I don't remember Carpool.
Oh, it was a classic. Yep. Problem Child, definitely. That was good.
But yeah, I miss the fact that, we had TGI Fridays, which was, thank goodness, is Friday.
Yeah,
and because we lived in that era in the 80s where television, there was nothing on most of the time. You had to get up at the butt crack of dawn in order to see anything of any value as a child.
Mm-hmm.
The cartoons only came on from like 5 a.m. and then ended at about 8 a.m.
Yeah, Saturday morning cartoons.
It was like, I got to go outside and play because there's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And then on Friday nights they had family shows, which was actually really good considering today, as a parent myself, it's really hard to find a show that like everybody can agree upon and that you feel comfortable with as an adult or as parents, sharing with your children and getting some value out of it that's both entertaining for an adult but also entertaining for a child.
Yeah.
And that's what we find ourselves going back to a lot of those shows. As a family, we've tried to incorporate that back into our lifestyle of, having family movie night.
What were some of those shows that was Full House on TGIF? Was that?
I know Family Matters was on it.
Yeah. Family Matters.
That was a good one. That's another thing that was so funny too. That with the whole the woke movement, it's kind of like, there's not enough representation. But like as a child, I was like, no, there's a lot. Fresh Prince. There was a lot of great representation. The Cosby Show and stuff like this.
Yeah, Cosby Show.
And it portrayed black families in a positive light.
Right.
And white people loved these shows. They were great.
Yeah.
It's so baffling to live in this new day and age.
Right. Like
growing up in the childhood that we grew up in, where it was like you were taught, hey, don't look at color.
Right.
And yet nowadays, if you say that, and when you say, well, I don't look at color, they'll say, well, then you don't see me. And you're like, what? I'll never forget when I had that conversation with a fellow colleague. I was so confused. I was like, what have I done?
So the proposition was, if you don't see color, you don't see them at all?
Yes. Have you not had this experience?
No. No way, man. What?
So I was talking with this person and I was like, I was raised I've got several stories because, I've actually got 2 adopted children who are from Africa.
Okay.
And so that makes I'm a very interesting dude and I got weird stories. But anyways, so I have all kinds of interesting conversations around race and stuff like that. But before my girls, before I brought them home, I was talking with a colleague at work, and I was just explaining, we got on the topic of race. Like I don't ever talk about race inside the work setting. I encourage people not to, because it's just a dangerous trap you're going to get yourself into.
Truth.
I only have these kind of conversations outside the workplace.
Yeah.
and usually after I've had enough conversations with people to know that like, hey, our relationship's close enough that I'm not gonna, if I say something stupid, I'm not gonna offend you. And I also have to evaluate people's sensitivity to that topic because it's such a hot topic these days. So anyways, but we were talking, and I had mentioned, I grew up in we're same conversation. We're talking about growing up in the '80s and stuff like that, and my family tried to raise. I grew up in a small town that was known as a sundown town, allegedly. I had, and if you don't know what a sundown town is, allegedly it's, don't let the sun go down on your butt. If you're still here, if you're of a minority group,
right?
That's kind of the idea behind a sundown town, and even so much so that we allegedly had a sign that said that exact same thing, which I had always heard this, but I had never seen that in my life. My friends and I actually went and tried to find the sign to see if this was true, and we never found it. But anyways, and so I was, we're talking about upbringing and stuff like that, and I just casually kind of mentioned, it was like, yeah, I grew up in a household that I was trained not to see color. I was trained not to look at people, judge, in the vein of Martin Luther King Jr., judge a person by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And then they were like, yeah, I don't agree with that. I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, if you don't see color, you don't see me. And I was like, when I heard that, I was so dumbfounded. I'm like, I don't, what? I don't even know how to respond to that statement. And then I was like, but, and that's what I get into. I was like, well, and this person was a fellow believer, they were a Christian. And I was like, well, I mean, our identities are in Christ. We identify who we are through Christ alone. And all other identities are subservient to that chief identity. Even our Americanism, all these other things, at least in my worldview. And they're like, no, the color of my skin is part of my identity. It's so ingrained into who I am that you can't separate the two. And I was just like, whew, I thought I had things understood. I clearly did not.
Well, it kind of implied in what he's saying there is that when he looks at you, he's going to see whiteness.
Right.
Right. And so then, like, what does that mean for your friendship if, I guess you make some assumptions about what whiteness means to this guy. But he doesn't see number 15. He sees whiteness first, I guess, or whatever. And, yeah, that's a little disturbing. I've never had anybody just come out and say that to me directly, but IRL, I tend to avoid these conversations like the plague. We're going to build a relationship and we're going to be friends, and we're not going to talk about the fact that we are different colors, because it's like, why try to stand on a landmine? I don't know. Right. Maybe I should try to have those conversations, but I don't, man.
I don't even know what to tell people in regards to this day, other than, hey, these conversations obviously need to be had, because these are things that people are thinking and feeling behind closed doors that they're not really cross-sharing across demographics. The interesting thing is that, in corporations today, like in the company that I work at, they force this upon you, that you have to go attend these, diversity trainings and stuff like that. And I go, and there is some good stuff that comes out of it. As far as like understanding that, hey, you need to be more sensitive and aware of the things that you say that might offend people. You might not intend it that way, but it comes across in a negative way. And I can appreciate that. I can get that. Understanding that a lot of people are still beholden to their stereotypes and biases, whether they realize it or not. I think there is some truth to that. I think those conversations, people, but it's like, I look at it as like, geez, I think we could kind of sum up a lot of this and just be like, hey, be careful what you say. Think before you speak could be kind of like the embodiment of this whole idea. I don't know if it like necessitates marches in the streets and burning down society because of these incidences. I would hope that we could work through them by having more civil conversation, but at the same time, I don't think you can have those conversations in the workplace anymore. Because if I were to dare speak up, I would probably get fired.
Well, I think that's the way we used to handle it. Talking about the '90s and TGIF and all that stuff, is that people, it was understood, and it's funny because I don't know that younger people would believe this, but it was broadly understood by all parties in the 80s and 90s that you don't judge somebody based on the color of their skin. You get to know them, and you judge them based on their displayed the character that they display. Like you judge them based on what they give you to judge them with, and so everybody gets a fair chance to be judged for who they are, and nobody gets a short shake. And I mean, I grew up in the Deep South as you did, and that's the way I was raised, and that's the way you were raised in the 80s and 90s. And I don't know, honestly, when you leave the Deep South, I've heard on people on the radio in Chicago refer to Alabama stan and Mississippi stan with the white Taliban and all this stuff. And I honestly, I don't know how you get there based on the way that I was brought up as a child of the Deep South. It baffles me. And I feel like it's just slander, baseless slander every time I hear somebody talk about the South that way. Because
I definitely think it's propaganda that's been pumped out within the last probably 10 years.
Right.
Like I saw a study recently, and it was like if you studied just the topic, the idea of this so-called white privilege, that's only been in existence within the last 5-10 years at the most. Right. That word never existed prior to that. That and even these kind of ideas, these I would call them grievance studies. This wasn't a thing. When we were growing up, 20, 30 years ago, this was not. I mean, maybe they existed, but in small doses, which is why you kind of feel like, or at least for me, it feels like propaganda, because it's like if people didn't put that idea in your head that you're a victim, would you know you are? Right. You probably wouldn't. You'd be like, I didn't know I was supposed to be mad about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I remember when this stuff started coming on in the late 90s, early 2000s. And by the time I lived in Georgia at the time, I was attending the public school system there. And and they started doing these it was interesting because I think it started in they had the gifted program or whatever. And I think it started with those classes where we would have these discussions about race and slavery and starting to introduce these ideas of, systemic racism. Those terms weren't used at the time, but it started just in those gifted classrooms, I think, before it rolled out into the rest of the curriculum in all the classes.
Right. The pivot occurred somewhere along the lines of what we weren't talking about history anymore. Yeah. It changed from talking about something that happened in the past to something that is continuing forward today.
Right. And I remember as a kid thinking this is really weird because all of a sudden, people that got along, kids that got along that were of different races and were friends, like we both had, suddenly they're trying to introduce, and it worked too. I was alienated from people that I was friends with because of this curriculum. And it the attitudes changed. I mean, I'm sure we were kids, right? I'm sure I was affected by it just as much as my friends of different races were affected by it. But after we went through that tutelage in the school, those friendships weren't the same after that. There was a resentment there that was never really fixed. And I had to basically, later in life I made other friends or whatever. But when as kids that just busted up the whole friendship dynamic of our school. I think I was in 5th or 6th grade, something like that, when that stuff went down. But yeah, it was weird, and it totally didn't reflect the society that we grew up in. It was very strange.
Right. Well, I think it's in large part because when you focus on your differences, that becomes anytime you introduce a categorization, you actually divide people. You don't unite people through pointing out your differences.
Yeah.
Right. You have to have a common social identity. I mean, and we're going to talk a lot about psychology and stuff like that today, because I'm a big fan of psychology and a lot of the psychological works of different individuals. But like, some of the ones that kind of come to mind right off the bat is Michael Lewis. He did a study or a write-up by two guys, Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, that was one of their chief premises of one of the things that they studied, was this idea of classification reinforcing stereotypes, right? Because the human mind all the time is making like similarity judgments. Those are representative heuristics. It's where we think of people in terms of stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
And what they pointed out was that if you want to reduce the power of a stereotype, you eliminate the classifications, because the more you reinforce the classifications, the more you reinforce the stereotypes. And the more you focus on race as a differentiator, the more those stereotypes will be driven into people's judgments.
Yeah.
And Robert Putnam was another. He was a Harvard psychologist. He did a study that showed that diversity, lowered social trust among individuals. And as we've seen, like over time in America, the disparity in the ethnic differences is in large part because we continue to separate ourselves. We don't have a common identity.
Well, let's pause there for a second, because I mean, going back to our upbringing in the South, I don't think the South has gotten any more diverse than it was than when we were kids.
Right.
Like
I don't really think so either.
Yeah,
it was
the
always,
demographics are
fairly diverse.
Right. The demographics haven't changed, but social trust has changed. It's gone way, way down. Right. Especially in the South. And so, I've heard that said a lot of times, that diversity decreases social trust, and I think they're corollary to each other. But at the same time, that doesn't explain the shift in society that we saw.
Well, it's a diversity change, not so much in ethnicity or in race, but in identity, right?
Okay.
And what you agree with, because you tend to, you're going to associate with people that are like you.
Yeah.
I see, and that's very hardwired, ingrained, and that's where I think a lot on the left have kind of steered. They took some of these extreme ideas and just ran wild with them.
Yeah.
Because it is true that people do tend to associate with people who are like each other. I mean, if you show up at a party with your spouse, inevitably the husbands and wives will depart, and the wives will go hang out with all the women, and the husbands will all kind of congregate together and hang out with each other.
Yeah.
Right. And those will cross social boundaries, because I mean, obviously one of the bigger differentiators is gender, right, or sexuality. The males and females will part ways, and you don't care if the other husbands are what race those guys are.
Right.
You're going to hang out with them more than you're going to hang out with the women. But in large part, we've lost as a society that common identity. We've one of the ways that in their study that Putnam did realize that if you wanted to overcome this, or one of the ways to reinforce social cohesion, was common shared experience. So if you were to think back of all the different things that people are involved in, can you think of something that showed that they found that he studied lots of different groups, and he found one group in particular had the absolute highest cohesion regardless of race? Do you know what it is?
Military.
Exactly. It was military.
Yeah.
Because they grain into you that, hey, you were all one and the same, because you're either all going to live or die together.
Yeah, and you suffer.
And
you
these
suffer
people are
together.
Your brothers and your sisters. These people matter more than anything, and you've got each other's back.
Yeah.
And you all, we fight for the same common cause. And even then, at the group level, it's like you fight for each other, and in a lot of ways, they kind of view each other as stronger than family. And so from that, they learned that you all these other issues that divided them, they're all unified because they had a common identity or a common cause, right? And that's, in some ways, that's kind of what we need as society. We've all, and everybody some degree thinks this, and it terrifies me. I think the elites kind of believe this too. And I think they have this crazy idea that, like, well, if we just get a war going, then it'll reunite the nation. Because, the last episode was 9/11's not too long ago, and everybody talked about 9/12. Right? Why can't we just go back to 9/12?
Yeah.
Well, what was it about 9/12 that was so special? Right? Well, we all had a common shared experience. We had 9/11, where we all went through this tragic event together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, the more shared experiences, even so much so, and Sumo and I had talked about this, because there is this, I think it's Project Bluebeam.
Yeah.
So much so that that we joke about it, but I could totally see them trying to pull it off in the future. That there was a government paper or idea, I guess you could say, of faking an alien invasion in order to unite humanity.
Yeah, man. Yep. We did a show on that a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the big shared, that would be another shared experience. Maybe we could do something that doesn't include like massive loss of life.
Yeah, well, going back to our initial conversation, how we got down this rabbit path was really going back to, we had a shared experience of Friday evenings, right?
Yeah.
Childhood experiences. Everybody got up at 6 a.m. to go watch television and watch cartoons, and we all watched the same cartoons because they went in a sequential order.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting, because you could kind of have a shared experience with another family even though you weren't together because you were watching the same stuff.
Right.
I'm generally like a kill your television sort of person, but I can at least see the value of that, because I remember talking to my friends about, did you watch this last night or did you watch that last night, and they would have watched the same shows with their families that I watched with mine. And that era is totally blown out. There is no more linear programming. Everything is on demand, and there's so many choices. No. Like sometimes you watch things together or whatever at the same time, but I don't know. It doesn't have the same like cultural effect that linear programming did in the 80s and 90s. But I did want to ask you, like, you're talking about the shared experiences that we need now and don't have. What were, if any, what were some of the shared experiences that did help society stick together better in the 80s and 90s than they do now?
Well, Putman wrote famously in his book, Bowling Alone. That was one of the things that he concluded from his study was that, and this is, I think I had mentioned this, maybe it was on this show or maybe it was somewhere else, I can't remember, about how I grew up in a household where there was this thing called bowling leagues.
Yeah, man. Yeah, bowling leagues.
Actually occurred where families would get together and they would bowl. Like you see it in television, but it's not something that's like common today. But what Putman found is that in towns and cities that had like more bowling alleys, they had stronger social cohesion. And that's hence the title of his book, Bowling Alone, was this idea that that was one of the things that brought people together back in that, back in the 80s.
How did Family Bowling League work? Because I know my family never did that. I'm curious about this.
Well, so, a lot of times it was through church leagues, which is, again, another social venue that brought people together. The church is a very valuable instrument in bringing people together and giving them a common identity, right? So there would be like church leagues a lot of times, and I think that was the one that my family was involved in, or my parents were involved in. Okay. And so what they would do is they said, hey, let's have a church bowling league, and that's what they did. And I can't remember, it was like on a Thursday night maybe. They would all go, husband and wives, teams, they would pair up with another 2 or 3 families, and we would go to the bowling alley, and the parents would bowl, and they would give me a fistful of quarters, and I would go play Street Fighter in the arcade. And we would do, and it'd spend maybe an hour and a half there. Yeah. While they would just spend some time bowling, but that there was, what are you doing? Oftentimes, if you're not bowling, you're just sitting around chatting. Right, you're just hanging out. Yeah, and we've lost the value of just hanging out in society. Because now, what do you do if you see people in a line? People in a line if you went to sporting events or you went to amusement parks and stuff like that, we didn't have cell phones. Right? Yeah, you didn't have that constant distraction at your fingertips. Yeah, and so what you did is you just sat around and you just you just chit chatted with people.
Mhm.
You weren't afraid to talk with strangers, because you ain't got nothing else to do. There's nothing better to do but just chat with those people around you.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, how another way, just even those small conversations with people help build cohesion, build trust with strangers. Whereas now it's kind of like we only trust people if there's some form of technology in between us. Like I don't trust getting in a car with a stranger unless it's Uber or Lyft.
Yeah. No, man, I had an experience a couple years ago. We were my family was on a road trip and we were driving through Alabama, and we stopped at a fast food joint, and we were sitting down to eat in there, and this sweet little lady walked up to us and just started chatting us up, just for no reason. Just said, "Hey, where are you guys from? Oh, you're such a cutie," pinching the cheeks and all that stuff with my kids, and it was like. Now I live in a large city now, and that never, ever happens in public. Never.
Right.
Never. But it's still like some old folks still kind of live that way, where you just walk up to strangers, especially in a small town where you probably know that somebody's from out of town by their manner, or you notice the plates on their car or whatever. And you just go talk to them and say hey, and ask them where they're from and chat them up,
Right.
And that, yeah, it's like that part of American culture is pretty much gone. And I think part of what did it is moving in the way we occupy our time. It's gone from shared experience to consumption. So like everything that we fill our time with is consuming things. So we're consuming, streamed programming online. We're consuming
individualized activities versus common activities or shared experiences.
Right. It's like a friend of mine's on a softball team, and he loves it.
Yes.
Like it's a great social outlet for him. But most people don't participate in that sort of thing anymore. I don't think.
And it's very troubling to me. Like, of my kids, I have two boys as well. My youngest son is very social. He's naturally that way. But he also, second child, had an older brother to always associate with and always hang out with and have, go play with and do different things with. Versus my older child, he was born, unfortunately, I guess during an age where there just wasn't as many people my age that had kids that age. I don't know. It's weird to see that kind of like I go hang out, have school lunch with him every now and then and hang out with him and his his peers, and there's just not that many other guys about his age, versus the younger child who's only 2 years younger, but he has this huge group of guy friends that are just really cool dudes to hang out with. But my older son, so he struggles socially with other individuals, and I've had to really push to try to engage him in team sports or shared experiences, because he's very much also of the mindset of individualized play. Part of it is because he's an introvert like me, but it's having to try to reinforce that those activities to get him plugged in, to get him socialized. And I'm finding it actually challenging today in a lot of ways. It's challenging because sports now has become so competitive that it lost its fun in some ways, in the sense that, parents now put their kids in baseball, and you now play year round. You play on a sports team, and if you don't make the cut very early on, then that's it. You're out. That sport is done for you.
It's kind of psycho. Yeah.
I mean, my neighbor, we had this discussion just the other day. His kid tried out for the swim team, and he's like 6, and he shows up. He is a father. He swam on the swim team, so he's like, "Oh, this will be good for him. Swimming's great for your body. You'll make friends, that kind of thing." Show up. They do swim. He swims down. He swims the lap down to the side. And they're like, "Oh, can he do backstroke?" And he's like, "Well, no, he's 6. I haven't taught him how to do backstroke yet." And like, "Oh, well, he can't make the team." He's like, "What?" He didn't make it. He's 6. Like, isn't that what you're supposed to teach him? Is the different strokes and stuff like that? Like, "Oh no, sir. He should have come in knowing how to do that." and so he didn't make the team.
Unreal,
so
man. That's psycho. Whoa.
He was so distraught about it because he was just like, what? Now his kid is not part of the. He's been cut out from society. He's been cut out from this social group because he wasn't prepared yet for that. And he's quickly finding that if you aren't very active in preparing your kid to get into these groups early, you're just cut out. You're not part of them. Versus growing up, I don't know about you, but for me, it was kind of like, look, I wasn't good at any sport.
No, me neither.
I played them all.
Yeah, no, same thing, man. Baseball, soccer, football, basketball. I did all, and I do not belong on a basketball court. Let me just tell you. But I played sports all the time. It didn't matter that I was terrible. I mean, baseball, I played right field or whatever. But who cares? Like, I still had friends and had something fun to do. But yeah, I think that it's like most kids aren't involved in sports anymore, and the ones that are like their lives revolve around it, and it's very, very intense. And that's weird to me too. And there's not a lot of things. It's funny because the organizations that were more chill, a lot of them have just gone to the dogs, like Boy Scouts of America, for example. My dad was a Boy Scout. He wanted me to go into scouting, and even when I was a kid, I thought, these guys, this is a little bit weird.
Yeah, I did too. I did it for a few years, and it was the same experience. And even then, it was a downhill slide.
Yeah.
We went on our camp out, dad, father, son camp out kind of thing, and they had pizza. And even my dad was kind of like, "Where's the like?" I thought we're supposed to roast hot dogs and stuff, or make hobo meals.
Oh man, well, I worked at a Boy Scout camp when I was in college. I worked there for 2 years, and one of the years I was the guy doing the backpacking trips. So I'd take these kids out for 3 days, backpacking, and we'd shake their bags down before we left, and they always brought video games with them. Every time, and you had to take the video games away, and they would freak out. And then these kids were so out of shape. I mean, we're talking, these were like 6 mile days, and these kids could not hang. They were throwing up, complaining, miserable. Just, I would always have to end up carrying other kids' packs because they just couldn't make it. They would just sort of poop out. It was crazy. And it just the way that organization, not to mention the degeneracy that was going on at Boy Scout camp. It was, now it's sort of an old news that there's perverts in the Boy Scouts. But dude, that place was, I knew then my kids will never be involved with the Boy Scouts.
And it's so sad because my uncle, he was an Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
And his experience was radically different than my experience. He loved it because he did do all the things that you were, that you were talking about as far as like going on long hikes for days on end.
Yeah.
Learning all the skill sets of how to survive in the wild on your own. The idea of merit, a merit-based system.
Yeah, right.
The idea behind the badges was that you earned them. You weren't just given them. He saw that. And that was what kind of paved the way for him going into the military. Mm-hmm. But he loved it. It taught him so much about life.
Well, it's funny. Most people don't know that the guy that started the Boy Scouts, Robert Baden-Powell, was a military spy, basically, in World War II. And he was running around Germany, dressed as a botanist with like a pith helmet and a net, catching butterflies. And he had like this book. His like notebook had all these drawings of butterflies, but within the butterfly, he would draw descriptions of the military installations and their capabilities, like encoded in the drawings of the butterflies. So when he would get investigated, he would just act like some entomologist nerd or whatever. And so he wrote a book called My Adventures as a Spy about his time in Europe during World War II, doing intelligence work, and then started the Boy Scouts as a way to basically teach children those skills of courage and leadership and outdoorsmanship and all that kind of cool stuff. I think probably
that's even cooler.
Yeah. So it's basically training kids to be like spies, field agents, which is pretty awesome, I think. But it's just amazing how that organization has fallen. And it's like, that was a great, if you were not going to do sports, that was a great way to like build camaraderie and have shared experiences and challenges and all that cool stuff. Like taking kids and making them hike up a mountain and carry all their food and water. I mean, that's an awesome experience. I did stuff like that when I was a kid, not with Scouts, but other things. And like that's an important growth step, you know, and if you can do that with your friends, even better. Like what a bonding experience. But yeah, it's been replaced by consuming. Yeah, you just like get on the iPad or whatever and just consume stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was much later in life, but I went on a white water rafting trip with some friends.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law went. He's a really cool dude, and I remember going on that trip, and it was so funny because I mean, if you've ever been, like the waters are, it's, you know, we went down, I think the Ocoee, maybe, I can't remember. Yeah. It was one of the ones that, it wasn't like the really advanced ones, but it was kind of in an intermediate level. Mm-hmm. The waters that were flowing pretty good, and they were white capping, and they had a few rough areas that you had to navigate around. And before we had even started the day, you know, like there was a storm that had come, and so it had rained, so the waters had even increased even more. But I mean, it was just absolutely beautiful. I mean, just the forest and stuff like that. And the funniest thing is, I was in there with my brother-in-law, and I was just like, just amazed at the beauty of nature and the beauty of God's creation. You know, and I even was just like, just so caught in awe of it. You know, as we're going down the river, it's just like, God, this is just so amazing. And these two lesbian couples were with us, and I remember them going, "God, you're so gay," and I was like, just the irony of that. I was just like, But you
had a shared experience with those lesbians.
We had a shared experience with those lesbians. And what was funny too, though, is that our first major dip in the rapids, the front of the boat goes completely under, and I'm at the very front, and so I'm just like, I'm completely underwater at this point. So I'm like, well, there's no sense in me holding on to the raft anymore. I'm still holding on to my paddle, but I'm like, there's nothing I can do. I'm floating out of the boat. Right. So I just kind of float out of the boat because I'm like, the whole ship's, I'm in my head, I'm like, this ship's capsizing because I mean, I'm completely under the water. Well, anyways, the boat pops up. It was what they call an Indo or something like that. And I had to swim back to the raft, and it was the lesbians that pulled me back up on the boat.
See, there you go. Shared experience building.
Shared experience.
Camaraderie. Well, so take us back to Bowling Alone and that stuff. Like what are some of the other ideas in there about happiness through social cohesion or whatever?
Well, I mean, it wasn't so much about happiness. It was just talking about, as far as social cohesion goes, it's just, I mean, in general, it was the shared common experiences of our childhood. So, you know, we've talked about bowling. We've talked about, public schools in some ways are good because they generate a shared common experiences, but then they kind of create niches within classes, you know, within the social groups. Right. But that's kind of where you start to develop, you know, those relationships is within those smaller niches within the school. That adolescence, when you enter into childhood, is where you start to build, you know, in early childhood you find your place in the home. Mm-hmm. You know, where's your life in relation to your role in the home and in the family. And then when you get into school is where's your relation in regards to your peers, right? And that's why you tend to break away from your parents, and children tend to take on more of the identity of their peers at that point, because they're trying to find their place in their peer group. And then ultimately, once you know, go off into college or go off into your job afterwards, is where's your place in the world, right? And the idea being as you're building from individual concentric circles out of relationships with other individuals. As you move from the individual, you know, as a baby, all of your needs are met, the world revolves around you. Then you move into the idea that, I have a family, right? And you have parents, and then you may or may not have siblings, but having siblings is great. And then you move into peers, right? And neighbors and things like that. And then you move into those associates and stuff into the world in those concentric circles. And that's kind of in part why those ideas form. but those shared experiences that we have along the way that allow us to bridge these, if you think of kind of like these things as like bubbles, how do these bubbles connect to each other is in through relationships, is through common shared experiences. So through groups, any type of group activity, and then y'all have talked about this in how the importance of that.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, if we want to pivot to a little bit into how this plays into some of these other things about the happiness studies that I really wanted to get into today. We've kind of talked. I was going to open with the crisis of the West, and as you know, the opioid addiction rates in our country are just astronomically high.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And in part, one of the reasons for that is because of the breakdown of social cohesion within society. I'm going to kind of jump ahead, but in the 70s, the Rat Park study.
The Rat Park study?
The Rat Park study.
No, I don't know what that is. Okay,
so in the 70s, what was the guy's name? I can't remember. It'll come to me in a little bit. They love studying rats in psychology, because rats and mammalian behavior is very easy to study. The rats reproduce quickly. They have a short lifespan, but you can kind of see that. That's why they use them in medical studies, but that's also why they use them. They also have similar characteristics in human, like humans, as far as their social cohesions go. So you could use them. He was using rats to try to understand social dynamics in them. And so one of the things that he studied, in Rat Park, is I think Sumo had talked a little bit about Rat Park in one of his past episodes. But one of the things that he did is he wanted to see what would happen to a society if you gave some rats everything, if you met all their needs.
Oh,
right?
Okay, I remember. This is cool. Yeah.
Right. So he created a fairly large, it was a large room that had, tons of cages connected together, and they can almost like a society, almost like a city is kind of what he was going for. And just to see what would happen, met their needs. And of course, what inevitably happened is they kept breeding, and they kept building more and more rats were grown and having babies and so forth. But he didn't change the constrictions of the society. He just kind of, so they flourished as far as like populating rapidly. But then all of a sudden, when they got to a point where the rats were starting to get kind of cramped in their cages, in all the cages and all the interconnectedness. And then some weird social behavior started emerging, too cramped together. And some of the things that emerged were the rats became more aggressive because even though the resources were plentiful, they kept providing enough resources to ensure that they all got their needs met. You had some rats that became very aggressive towards other rats and prohibiting them to getting their food and stuff like that. Some of the other ones would isolate themselves. He called those the beautiful ones. Because what they would do is they'd end up spending their more time grooming themselves than socially interacting with the other rats. And then the mothers stopped caring for their young. They became very negligent of their children. And this is all in a society, where the rats' needs were completely met.
Yeah.
And then the population peaked, and it just started taking a pretty sharp decline. And so from that, as you can imagine, they didn't know what to expect, but when they observed this, they were kind of like, oh. And that study was a large part one of the concerns for what they considered like the population bomb theory. It's why a lot of social elites freak out and think that we're overpopulating the planet.
Right.
Because in some ways they're right. And we can kind of feel that, and we observe that in our society, where in large cities, that's why you have the rates of mental illnesses in large cities is radically higher than in rural and suburban areas.
Oh, absolutely.
They're so crammed in together, and you're constantly banging up against each other. It creates this awkwardness where people just they turn in, right? Which is weird because, here we were talking about the importance of social cohesion and stuff like that. But yet there's also this need to have some separateness.
Well, there's
right?
a kind of an interesting, as you were talking about the rat study and overpopulation concerns, there's sort of a disconnect there because, on the one hand, the I don't like the term elites, the people with lots of money and too much free time, they on the one hand are very concerned with overpopulation, but on the other hand are also trying to get everybody crammed into living in tightly packed cities.
Right.
And
they
so,
also consume more resources than the other groups too. They're the ones saying like, well, you're destroying the earth and destroying the planet. And yet their carbon footprint is massively higher.
But it's like if their concerns are coming,
individual.
If their concerns are born out of the rat park study, it doesn't square.
I don't think a lot of them, I don't even think or realize that it was the rat park study that's influenced their thinking. Like, I think some of this is natural.
Right.
That this mindset has kind of evolved where this, because this, from the rat park study, a lot of all that behavior was naturally occurring. They didn't force it to happen.
Right.
So, but okay, did you want to say anything more before I kept going into
how
this
keep
relates
going
to happiness?
Yeah, keep going, man.
Okay. So from that, they did another sub-study, and, like good scientists do, they wanted to see what would happen if you gave rats cocaine. and so they took a subset of them, and they fed them cocaine in a cocaine drip. They put it in the water, and they socially isolated the rats and gave them all the cocaine that I guess your little heart's content would want. And they drank it up, and sure enough, after so many days, they became addicted to cocaine. So much so that they exhibited all the same behaviors that we as humans exhibit as well, where you neglect family, you neglect friends and stuff like that, and you focus primarily, all of your efforts are just spent on trying to get more of the drug or the opioid or whatever.
Right.
So they wanted to see, can we break addiction? What happens if we essentially go cold turkey for a period of time and immerse them in a society back with just a smaller group with all the activities and toys and stuff that a little rat would want, right? And they did that. They would separate them for I think it was like for around 60 days. And they would let them, play with the other little mice. And it took them a while. And the reason why they had to do it for 60 days is because it took the addicted rat, a while to get socialized back with the other rats.
Right.
But what they observed after that 60-day period is that when they would then bring back the cocaine water and put it in there, and a very small fraction of the rats that were once addicted would go back to the cocaine water.
Ooh.
And what they learned is, and the observation and the conclusion they drew from that is that opioid addictions and stuff like that are mainly in large part a consequence of the breakdown of those social relationships. If you reintroduce those social relationships back into people, and you break them from that chemical dependency for a period of time, there is hope. Because the idea of addiction has evolved over time. We originally thought it was, it's a moral failure issue, right? That you didn't invest enough in your moral upbringing and thinking in order to prevent you from falling down that trap. Or we thought of it as a spiritual issue along those same terms. That's where the 12-step program kind of evolved, is that, you need to appeal to a higher power in order to generate the willpower to overcome that addiction. Well, then from this, they actually concluded it's actually, more than all that. It's actually the need for others in your life. Like, we really do need other people in our lives in order to thrive. They've done other studies too, like the monkey study on baby monkeys. I love reading about this stuff because I just find it so fascinating about what would happen to baby monkeys if you separated them from their mother in early childhood. And they would separate these monkeys, baby monkeys, from their mothers early childhood, and you just kind of give them a bottle. And that was it. Didn't give them any physical affection or anything like that. And and they would raise them for a large chunk of their lives socially isolated from each other. And then when they later in their life, as they matured and tried to bring them back together, they could not function. They could not socially interact with each other. They couldn't. They would be either extremely aggressive and violent towards the other monkeys, or they were just completely disinterested and wanted nothing to do with the other monkeys. And so what they realized is kind of the idea of like the mother's touch, of how valuable it is. This is part of the reason why there was this movement to returning back to breastfeeding away from bottle feeding.
Yeah.
Was because these studies kind of made them realize like how important that social bonding is between a mother and a child. If you separate that, there are massive damaging consequences that occur in the brain that affect that person for the rest of their life. So that's why they're big on like skin-to-skin contact with newborn infants. They place the child on the mother, and they want that skin-to-skin contact because having that closeness immediately starts affecting the brain, from the smells, from the touch, all these things, utilizing all of your senses helps start the formulation of your brain. Yeah. And so it's also, and that same interaction between a mother and child starts to play out in early adolescence, where they start to engage and interact with other children. It's also the reason why, there's a return in our society of moving towards homeschooling. And there was always kind of the running joke that homeschool kids were weird. Right. And it was in part because of the lack of social interaction. The wiser parents who realized this, they would get their homeschool kid plugged into social events that allowed them to develop those skills and to develop those interpersonal relationships that they needed in order to develop into a fully functioning adult. Right. And the ones that didn't, the kids, they continued to suffer to some degree because they never developed those It's more than just learning those skills of how to interact with socially with other people. Like, it really does affect the brain. Well, and how they know this is true.
Can we do a little aside here about homeschooling?
Yeah, go ahead. Because I think, do y'all homeschool?
Yeah, we do. We're involved in a co-op, so we do 3 days a week at home and 2 days a week at a school with other kids. So it's a really cool. It's a great way to do it. We love the co-op. But growing up, I remember thinking homeschoolers were weird too when I was young. And later I realized the reason I thought that is because every once in a while at school you would get a new kid who was homeschooled and is now going to a conventional school.
Right. It was usually at high school or maybe late middle school where they would get introduced back to the larger group. Right.
And that population selects for homeschool families that didn't do well. So homeschool was a disaster. They didn't do a good job. Maybe there were weird shut-in families. There was at that time a lot of the families that did homeschooling did so because they were shut-ins. Like they already had psych issues and didn't want to be around other people. But it wouldn't work. The education wasn't going well, so they'd eventually capitulate and put their kids in school. And so the school administrators and the teachers had this impression of homeschool families that they're just total weirdos, but in fact, only the ones they were seeing were weirdos. And that's something I didn't really realize until later in life. But that color, even as a kid, that colored my impression of homeschooling.
Mm-hmm. What was talk some more about co-op? Yeah, it's
the
cool. Co-op method. Explain that a little bit.
So everybody, all the families are homeschools, and in the state where I live, you this is stupid, but you have to register your homeschool as a educational institution with the state. So my family has its own school, and so we're considered legally a homeschooled family now. A lot of times, and this is becoming very popular, families will sort of pool their resources and they'll meet once or twice a week, depending on how they want to run the program. It's all very parent driven and catered to the desires of the family. And so oftentimes you'll have one parent in a certain family is maybe has an education in a high education in mathematics. Another one maybe works as a chemist. So you get those people, especially up in the higher grades. You get from the parents, you'll get specialized teaching and people sharing their expertise, which is really cool because they're passionate about the job of education because they're educating their own children. Mm-hmm. And it's really fun to do this sort of thing. And then the program that we are involved with is set up as a tutoring service. I think in technically, and so this is it operates like a school. There are paid teachers, but all the kids that attend it are homeschoolers. They're on a homeschool ticket, but they go there for tutoring services, and these tutoring services follow a very rigorous curriculum. So, like the kids, my kids are at the age where they go once a week, and they have classes and they get assignments and there's tons of reading and all this stuff. And then throughout the week they do all that stuff. And my wife is a teacher at this operation too, and she teaches some of the young kids and some of the older kids. And so it's really cool. And there's an administration. They hire teachers. A lot of the teachers are parents also. I would say most of them are. And they have, a choir, and they have really neat, they're learning my son's in the second grade. He's learning Latin. They're really doing some neat stuff. They're reading the classics. They're memorizing poetry, really stuff that you would not get in a public school, and stuff really far beyond what I got when I was in, sort of a hoity-toity private Christian school. The kids that are coming out of this from the high school program, they're writing like master's level theses and presenting them before a panel. That's how you finish high school in this program, is you have to do a thesis. It's a very cool, and there's stuff like this everywhere, all over the country. It's because of the decay of the public school system into total anarchy in some places. I mean, I think some public schools are actually pretty good. Usually, ours
locally is pretty good, and that's why we moved to where we did in large part because it was my childhood area where I grew up, and we knew it had a good school system. We were friends with all the teachers. We all attended the same churches and stuff like that. Yeah. So we all know each other. We know our belief system.
Yeah, it's a community-driven program, which is what it should be. And I think in a lot of, especially rural areas, a lot of the public schools are still controlled by community interest. And there's shared culture and beliefs and standards of behavior, and there's a coherent cultural ethics that pervades the population. So you can trust people that you don't know because you're reasonably assured that they believe the same things about right and wrong that you do. And so that can actually support and make a good public school even today. But contrary to that, in the major cities where none of those things are true, like you're talking about diversity destroying social trust, it's like diversity of belief systems, diversity of what's right and what's wrong. Like, does this culture support child marriage or, to grown men or whatever, that kind of thing. It's like you don't know what the other people in the school think is right or wrong. So in the major cities, homeschooling is exploding, and people are forming of all sorts of persuasions. I mean, it's huge in the Christian community, but it's also other communities are doing a lot of homeschooling now too. It's not just conservative Christians anymore. So yeah, I think it's a response to the breakdown of social trust. That's where the homeschool revolutions come from.
Oh yeah, I totally see that, and I think it will only continue to amplify and almost and accelerate.
Yeah.
As people continue to lose that trust with the public education systems, you'll continue to see more experimentation and the co-op kind of method that you're talking about, because it's kind of like they get some private school kind of ideas, and the idea of even education of how to do it. We're kind of revisiting or reevaluating, like, well, what does it mean to get an education?
Yeah.
What exactly should we be teaching our children?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. I taught with sumo of one of my other side projects, which I'll probably never get off the ground, that I would love to do, because I would have thought this would have been so great, is that in engineering today, we have such a huge breakdown of understanding the basic concepts of how things actually work.
Yeah.
We teach society, and growing up, and in some degree today, they teach science through observation, through experimentation, right? But that's the whole idea behind science.
Yeah.
Right. But I would have loved to have a program, a class, if you will, or even a whole education system framed around the idea of, like, how did we get here to where we are today, right? So let's go back and let's go through history and let's look at who were the people and what were the ideas that they pitched, and let's problem solve as if you are them, right?
Oh, cool.
And we're going to start from the very basics of how the basic elements work as they figured them up at their time. And we're almost going to, the idea being that let's relive all the great scientists' lives, observe all their failures, let's experiment, let's play with their thoughts and ideas as a class, and think about how could we improve this, right? And then find out, oh, they actually tried that too. Like, the development of the light bulb, or the development, how do we utilize electricity? How did we discover electricity?
Oh, dude, I'll tell you, homeschool families would eat that up.
Oh, I bet.
They
would
eat
it
up. Oh, man.
I would get excited thinking about it. I was like, that would be such an amazing class. I would love to be a part of that. And it's like, where is it? It doesn't exist. Dadgummit, someone needs to make that.
Somebody do something.
Hopefully, if it does, if someone, I'm pitching this out there, so maybe one of our MAPS members will get on it. That could be either life mission and purpose, is to develop that same program. Maybe they have a greater desire of it than I do. Maybe one of those YouTubers, because some of the guys on YouTube, some of these engineers are absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
They're so smart in some of the stuff that they come up with and invent that I'm just blown away.
I would like to think that some of those guys do this sort of thing on the side. It just doesn't make it onto YouTube, because really there's no money in doing that sort of thing. Like, you're doing that, even if you charge tuition for the class, which I'm sure everybody would be willing to pay it doesn't add up to a lot, right? Like, my wife teaches twice a week, and she does not contribute significantly to the income of our family, but that's great. Like, we're not doing it for that. We're doing it for, it's such a great thing. It's so satisfying to know that my family is contributing in multiple ways to the education of our little community, right? And we're like blessing other families with our aptitude, because my wife is a fantastic teacher. She's been a teacher for a long time. She's taught in public schools and private schools and all this stuff. And so now doing this co-op thing, it's really like it's almost a personal mission of our family. It's like, this is how we're going to benefit the people around us, is through involvement in education. So it's very rewarding.
Yeah. I love it. It's kind of going back to the happiness stuff. So a lot of this stuff is kind of framed and summed up well in Jonathan Haidt.
Mm-hmm.
He's a social psychologist. He wrote a book called The Happiness Hypothesis.
Okay.
And so in it, he starts off with asking the basic questions that everybody asks. What makes us happy? Right. And people tend to fall into one of two camps. They think of it as external factors, right? It's your circumstances. We all kind of, I think, naturally evolve into think this way of like, oh, if I just had this, that would make me happy. Talking about being a consumer society. We just constantly want to feed ourselves with more and more tools and gadgets and individualized experiences and stuff like that. We're thinking that will make us happy. Only to find out, nah, I'm still not happy.
Yeah.
The pleasures that come from those things are very short-lived.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have those on the Eastern philosophers' ideas, which said, well, happiness is internal. Right. That's where, these people go off and think that, well, if you go off and live in a cage and then just a cave and meditate all the time, then maybe you can self-generate happiness.
Yeah.
Right. And that sounds miserable if you ask me.
Yeah.
Like that sounds like a terrible experience.
Yeah.
But what he comes to the conclusion of is actually in between. And what do we mean by in between is that in some ways it's true that happiness comes from within, but it comes from within and is in part shared with others, right? We as humans feed off of each other from almost like emotional energies and those emotional connections, right? We call it empathy of that relationship that we have with other people, where if they're sad, you're going to naturally feel a little sad yourself. If they're happy, you're going to feel a little happy. It's why people go to parties, is because, everybody's happy and you just kind of feed off of that energy and that excitement and having a good time, right? And so he kind of summarizes in his book kind of like the in-between of how do you achieve both things is that first off, start on improving personal connections through gratitude, right? And a lot of these things that I'll talk about through these different studies on happiness, they all kind of come around to this idea of what I mean by showing developing personal connections through gratitude is like you'll hear the practice of, hey, when you first wake up, write down 3 things you're thankful for, right? Or write down 3 things that you're grateful for in relation to other people. Like you're thankful for this relationship that you have. You're thankful for this person and what they contribute to your life. You're thankful for your children or their teachers and how they're helping your children and all. You can think of an endless and limitless number of those connections, and just taking a moment to express and appreciate gratitude, right? Yeah. And then the second thing that he talks about is utilizing your strengths, your gifts, and your talents. Kind of like what you're talking about with your wife. She has the gift of teaching, or she's a pretty good teacher, right? And she exercises that gift by teaching not just your children, but other people's children too. And it gives her a sense of fulfillment. Yeah. Right. It gives her that feeling of purpose of this helps me out, and while helping out other people. I've heard it said that the greatest 2 days in your life are the day that you're born and the day that you realize your purpose for being born. Right. That's kind of where people who find lasting happiness, we'll call that joy, because I've heard people try to distinguish between happiness as being temporal and joy being a longer experience, maybe, or something that overcomes just your circumstances, right? But either way, it's we're essentially talking about the same thing. And then lastly, he talks about being part of a group. Being connected, whether it be through church or some community service group. We experience that in work, which is one of the reasons I think why so many people are struggling now is because of having to work remote. You've lost those connections. I mean, the chief reason that why people want to go back into the office, to their offices to work, is because they miss that social interaction. That was their only place that they could have social interaction was through work.
What is that? Just pause there. What does that say about our society right now, that people want to go to work because they're lonely? Like,
sad.
I'm lonely, so I'm going to go to work. I mean, that's a wild statement when you think about it.
Yeah,
like, is there really nothing?
They go to cubes, but just the sheer fact that you may see somebody that Wow. That you've spent enough time with them, you kind of know, Mary across from you who sits in the cube across from you, right? Just because y'all spent so much time, you've had enough casual passerby, hellos that you now have a little bit of a relationship with that person, right? Yeah. And you can talk with her and talk with them. It is sad. That's where we've come to as a society.
Yeah, it's indicative of the broad need, and I wonder if for a lot of people it's a unconscious need. Like, they're not really aware of why or what they're lacking.
Absolutely, I think you're absolutely correct. I think most people don't realize they realize it to some degree that, like, I just miss being around people, right? But they don't realize it's like, well, what other areas of your life are you involved with around other people?
Right.
Biblically speaking, this is one of the reasons why the apostles were like, hey, don't neglect the fellowship with other believers.
Yeah.
right? Because they knew that you need other people in your life.
Oh, man.
You need them for encouragement in the buildup. This is why the church is so valuable and why it's thought of as a body, is because, and that's why they use the illustration, and why the Apostle Paul used it so much in describing the interconnectedness of other people, is because you all have different skills, gifts, and talents, but you utilize them together for the common good.
Yeah.
Right. And that common experience being, as Christians, the spreading and sharing of the gospel. Right.
Yeah, man. And it's that metaphor of the body is so powerful here, because especially like during the COVID craziness, and a lot of churches were closed for some of them up to a year. They didn't meet. And if you think about that metaphor of the body, you're basically just dismembering the body. Like everybody's all taken apart. And I don't think the cost has really been counted on that, because it's starting to be counted because a lot of people are just not coming back. And a lot of people really suffered a lot of loneliness because of that, and the church wasn't there for them in many cases. Like,
well, and the church even closed their own doors, which is absolutely blew my mind.
Yeah, me too.
That they would do that. It's like you're living in fear, which is the complete opposite of what our founder said to do.
Yeah.
Jesus did not say, hey, if things get scary, just go shut down,
close down.
Don't meet with each other.
Don't meet with each other. Yeah. It's wild, but it's, I have some sympathy because the propaganda was so powerful, and like everybody was so freaked out a year and a half ago. Like it's not. I'm not totally surprised that it happened, but at the same time, it was a gigantic, terrible mistake. And we're still paying for it, and we're still trying to learn the lesson, because state demands upon churches they're not going away. They're getting weirder, and they're coming from different angles. But we still haven't, as the church broadly, haven't learned the lesson of, hey, don't inflict this upon yourself by obeying these ridiculous decrees.
Right. Well, I mean, in Canada, they forced them to shut down. In Australia, the same.
Yeah.
In the U.S., we just voluntarily said, all right, we just won't meet.
Which is bonkers. Yeah.
Unless I guess you're out in California where they did kind of force them to shut down.
Right. But I mean, John MacArthur out there, he took state of California to school, or was it city of Los Angeles? I don't know who the lawsuit was against. But yeah, they fought it and won. And I'm so thankful for guys like John MacArthur that stood up, and said, "Nah, we're going to meet. We're not closing down at all." And
right, that was one of the things that I tried to express to a lot of my. I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole of just talking about the virus and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure.
But we can if we want to take a side on that. But regarding the virus, in the approaches people were taking to address it, my concern has always been, but we don't know the unintended consequences for any of these things that we're doing.
Yeah.
Right? Because everybody always thinks of in terms of like, hey, problem, solution. Let's just put in the solution. But you very rarely realize what the unintended consequences of your solutions may be.
Yep.
Right? Like, what are the consequences of masking young children and young children who are developing not being able to see the mouths of teachers?
Yeah.
Right? We don't really fully know that. What we do know is that how valuable it is that when you learn to speak, you learn in part by studying the mouths and the body language of other people. Right? Yeah. That's part of how language is acquired. Is through not just the words itself, but through that physical presence by seeing the mouths of the people. I mean, poor deaf people, they have to see they have to see the other person's mouths a lot of time to make sure they understand correctly what they're hearing, or people who are struggle with hearing. And so we don't know how that's going to affect young children in development by not seeing that.
Well, some of this is becoming known. Kids that started kindergarten in 2020 are now going into first grade. Some of them, and they're going in, and they're in areas where masks are not required. They still want to wear their masks because they're afraid that their friends and their teachers will be able to see their face. Like they don't want their face to be seen by everybody because they've been wearing a mask since they left the home for school, which is crazy that these poor children are afraid for other people to see their face. I mean, what in the world?
Yeah, we don't know the level of trauma that we're inflicting on people. It is going to be devastating. Like there was a study out in Europe, and they realized that they added 1 million more alcoholics in Europe from the shutdowns.
I believe it. Absolutely. Yeah.
I
mean, it goes back to that idea.
Explosion over time of increased more mental illness in our society because of all the other unintended consequences of social isolation, the separateness created from this, the masking, the disconnect from not touching. We don't shake hands anymore. I still do. I'll stick my hand out and shake someone's hand.
Yeah, me too.
But that's very sad and very troubling of what this means for our society. Just as much as I mentioned, I mean, just the idea of touch. Just putting your hand on the shoulder or shaking someone's hand.
Yeah.
Hugging. I'm not much of a hugger, but I understand and appreciate the value of embracing someone.
Yeah, man, I haven't given somebody a hug that's not in my family. Man, I guess I'm sure it's been over a year since I've hugged anybody that's not in my immediate family. That's a wild thought because people at least in my circles, people would often, if you hadn't seen somebody in a while or whatever, you'd greet each other with a hug. Like if I see one of my bros that I haven't seen in a while, they're getting a hug. Well, they used to.
Yeah.
But all that is gone. It didn't really even occur to me until you just said it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that infuriated me more than anything else was the hospital's requirements of not letting people see their loved ones dying.
Yeah.
I think that's pissed me off more than anything else because the one thing that everybody wants when they're dying is for their loved ones to be near them.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, well, they're so afraid. I'm like, I don't care. Put a hazmat suit on and expose their hand because you need that physical touch. They want it. And believe me, I mean, so much so that I guarantee you, if you were to do a study and find the people that had people come in and visit them versus the people who didn't, I would guarantee you'd probably see 80 to 90% of the people who had people had come in and visit with them and hold their hand and touch them and stuff would see improvement and would improve and recover from COVID and from sickness.
Oh, bro, that reminds me of a story that you're probably familiar with also from our shared experience together back in the day. But a friend of mine, his brother was in a terrible car accident. And was ejected from the vehicle and had damage to his head such that his skull was like missing a piece and his brain was exposed. And he was in the hospital and it was bad. He had terrible brain swelling and it was rough. And so what my friend asked us to do is we would take shifts in the hospital and we'd go in there and we'd hold his brother's hand. Yes. Because when we would hold his hand, you could watch it on the monitor because they had his head wired up for intracranial pressure. And as soon as somebody would let go of his hand, the intracranial pressure would start to rise. Okay. Yes. And that equals brain damage. And so we take turns for hours just sitting there holding his hand to keep his intracranial pressure down. And that guy made a full recovery from that wreck. And that always stuck with me how important it is when somebody's in those sorts of circumstances to have somebody there to hold their hand. I mean, as hokey as that seems.
Absolutely. And you don't realize too, the other thing too, or you want to utilize all the senses. So holding the hand, the physical touch is so good that you did that and that you held their hand. When my grandfather was dying, it's so sad to me that people don't know how to handle death either. Yeah. One of the things that we had a common friend that actually came and visited me. I hadn't seen him in years, and I don't know how this came up. We were sitting in my living room, and I joked about how you know why they call it a living room, right? And he was like, "No." I'm like, "Well, they call it a living room because in the olden days, before we really had funeral homes and morgues and that kind of thing, you would put the body in a separate room that was called the waiting room." right? And you were waiting to see if the person was really dead or not. But in the living room, people would live. The living would sit in the living room, and they would just kind of leave grandma, grandpa, or whoever off to the side to make sure that they're really dead.
Wow.
And that's really where the word comes from. But anyways, sorry, another side. But anyways, going back to the physical touch and that aspect. Also, I was talking about people don't know how to observe death. So I go to see my grandfather. He's dying. He was dying of dementia, and I just walk in and I bring a book and I sit down and I hold his hand and I just start reading the book out loud to him. And my aunt and my mom were kind of like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, even though you think he can't hear us, I think he can. And so I'm going to go ahead and read out loud to him because I think he can." And I don't know if he heard me, but I do know that a lot of people who've been in a coma are very aware of the presence of their loved ones when they're there.
Yeah.
Right. And at some level, they can feel them and they can hear them. Right. And they can know that, and you want to make that presence known as much as you possibly can for your loved ones, because if they know that you're there, they have a much higher rate of overcoming that sickness or that injury because they have a reason to fight, right? They fight to be with the living.
Yeah.
They fight to continue to maintain those relationships or maintain those connections that we have between each other.
Yeah, man. If I'm ever in dire straits, I want to be at home. I don't care if y'all goof it up and give me bed sores, or whatever. Like, keep me at home with my family, because that's the reason I will stay in the realm of the living a little longer. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you want to pass away peacefully. That's the best way too. You're talking about peacefully. Like, you really, like what y'all did, holding his hand and stuff like that. You really can actually lower the stress hormones, the cortisol levels in their brain by those relationships, by that presence, by talking to someone. That's why we get so much benefit of just talking with other people.
Yeah. Right.
Is because you actually do lower your stress hormone by just talking it out, by having that conversation, having that connection with someone else.
Yeah, man. As an aside, I think that's why a lot of people listen to podcasts. We've mentioned this on the show. It's sort of a meta level observation, but people are listening to podcasts now because they need to hear a friendly voice. I mean, the content matters, and you want to strive to produce content, but I think a lot of people tune in because it's like we were saying, people are going to work because they're lonely. I think it's sort of the same thing as like people are searching for to feel a connection with other people. And I know, because I enjoy some podcasts too, and I feel a connection to the people that I listen to, as well as the audience. Like mailbag. If I hear another listener's name that I know a little bit about them just from them being interacted with on the show, like, that's cool. Like, I feel like I'm hearing about an update on my friend, right?
Right. Yeah,
and I think that the whole popularity of this medium is so driven by the profound alienation that people feel trying to live in modern, third industrial revolution society.
Yeah, I mean, and even talking about podcasts, the reason why people listen to talk more than just talk radio, as far as like the news and stuff like that, is because they like hearing about other people's life experiences. That's why you listen to it. You actually do want to know that, like, you're not alone.
Yeah, and
that other people have a similar experience as you,
right? Or
maybe a different experience, and you just want to know what that experience is like.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. One of the reasons that talk radio is failing is because it's impersonal. The presentation that talk radio gives, it's very sort of professional and clinical, and everybody's trying to be serious newsmaker or opinion generator, and it's so impersonal that you never feel a connection to those people on talk radio, and so, like, Rush Limbaugh is dead. The era of talk radio is over, and the people that are going to make it in the new era of whatever replaces talk radio are going to be the ones that give their audience some kind of a personal connection.
I mean, that's why Joe Rogan's so popular.
Yes.
It's because
Yeah.
Joe's such a down to earth kind of guy.
Yeah. He's so good at
And
this. Yeah.
he's just gonna cut through the BS, and he's gonna speak his mind.
Yeah.
And he wants to have a real conversation with somebody else.
Yeah. And it's like people don't want to hear anymore. I don't think they don't want to hear a talk radio host like beat up their guests or beat up their callers and argue with them. They want to hear people talk to each other that like each other. You know what I mean? Like they want to hear a conversation between friends who care about each other, you know?
Or I don't have a problem with people who disagree.
Yeah.
You know, as long as they can do it in a way where they're trying to understand the other person's perspective. They might fundamentally disagree with each other.
Right.
But I don't have a problem listening to that disagreement because I want to hear both sides.
Yeah. But if it's done in like
done
friendship,
in such a way that they're not trying to disparage and destroy the other person.
Right. Right. Because I think people have had enough of that. Because it doesn't scratch the itch, the social itch that we need, you know, to feel relationships. Yeah. Yeah, dude, you're right.
So, all right. So that's kind of the summation of Jonathan Haidt's happiness hypothesis, talking about the in-between, right? Of the internal and the external, right? So I want to go to another person, Mo Gadot's happiness solution.
Okay.
Right. So this is a guy, he was a former VP of Google. This is back before Google was evil. Google used to have a model that said, don't be evil. Right. And I think when they first started out, they tried to live by that to some degree.
Yeah.
They came up with a lot of brilliant ideas and had a very radically different way of approaching business and approaching relationships with their employees and the people within them. You know, today they're now just part of the evil empire. But back then, Mo Gadot was one of these individuals who was using some of his free time to try to understand, well, what is it that makes you happy? Here's a guy who by age 28 was a VP. He had spent some time at, I think, IBM, Microsoft, and some of the other big name companies, and then ended up as a VP at Google. And at 28 years old, you know, had it all. And he talks about how, you know, he was a multimillionaire by such a young age, and you know, had used his brain power, very logical reasoning, to acquire a lot of money by being a great engineer.
Yeah.
Right. And he talked about how he at one of the defining moments of his life is he ordered 2 Bentleys. Right, just because he can. Why not? He ordered some of the most expensive cars on the planet, thinking that, you know what, I want a Bentley. Why one? Why not 2? Right, and he talked about how he got those Bentleys there to his house. He got them delivered, brand new, and he wasn't happy. He said it didn't even add 1 minute of happiness to his feeling of what he was looking for. Right. And so it profoundly disturbed him that this didn't make him happy at all. Like, here's a guy who had everything. And so he's like, all right, I need to figure this out. Like, he went down his engineering brain path to understand, like, how do I reverse engineer happiness? Right. And so, so what he did is he went out and he interviewed people that he thought were happy. He interviewed people that he saw all the time that just seemed very jovial and happy, and he interviewed scientists and all this other stuff to try to understand, what is it that make people happy. And he kind of basically came up with like a three things, I guess, 3 big takeaways from his book. Was basically like, one is you do have to have your basic needs met. Right. If you've been to any third world countries, you know that it's very depressing. There are people that if they don't have shelter, they don't have food, they don't have clean water, they don't have these basic needs, like, they're depressed.
Yeah.
You know, we often think that they're happy. They're not. They're very sad, and they'll flat out admit it, that life sucks because it's hard.
Yeah.
But just above that, and I mean not much more above that, there are people who have their basic minimal needs met, and they're absolutely happy.
Yeah. Right.
And you're like, whoa, this is really weird, because you have we as Westerners would see them and be like, oh, y'all are all just like dirt poor. It's just, it's terrible, circumstances. And then you would meet somebody you would say, this person's way happier than me.
Yeah.
Like, they love life. What in the world is going on? Right. So we'll circle back to that later because I got some fun stuff to talk about tribes and people who've done interviews with them. But anyways, I want to keep going through this real quick. So meeting basic needs, up to $75,000. They did another study that said that, and it probably has expanded a little bit then, but after about $75,000 of income, not $1 will add any more happiness to your life. Because at $75,000, all your basic needs are met, and then some. Right. And so you're any more than that, you're wasting time. You're not going to get any happier from acquisition of more money and more material things. So then he flipped and looked at it from, well, what about the absence of unhappiness? Right. Clearly, happiness is then defined by, or maybe you could define it as the absence of unhappiness. Well, what are the things that make us unhappy? Right. And what he realized is that, well, some of the things that you're going to encounter in life are beyond your control. There are circumstances in life that you just can't control, and you're going to be that are going to make you unhappy, right? You can think about the thing, but there are some things that you can control, right? And so he used an example of rain. If rain falls on a day, if you were the type of person who you were planning on going to the pool and spending the day out in the sun, that's going to make you sad because it affected your plans. Right. But if you're a farmer and it rains, you're going to look to be as this is a great thing because you're not going to have to work outside all day in the blistering sun. B, it's watering your crops, which you need for your very survival. And C, it's also saving you money because you're not having to turn on the water spigot and water your own crops. Yeah. Right. The rain is great to you, and it makes you happy if you're a farmer. So then what he realizes is that, well, it's also about your perception, right? And so he kind of sums this up as, your happiness is equal to or greater than the difference between the events of your life and your expectations of how life should behave, right? In other words, and this is the way I like to think of it, is the gap between expectations and reality is disappointment.
Yeah.
So I think of it like a line chart because I'm a data scientist by nature, and so I love graphs. And if I were to draw a graph for you, I'd be like, here's what you think of as should be happening, and then here's what really happens. And the distance between these two lines is all unhappiness, right? And so a lot of times people think of me as being a pessimist, and I'm like, no, I'm a realist.
That's what all pessimists say. Yeah.
I was like, just set your expectations low and you'll never be disappointed. You'll always be happy at the outcome because reality will always exceed your low expectations. It's kind of a cynical way, because I'm also a cynic by nature, of looking at it. But basically, change your perception. Think about it, when you encounter the things that are unhappy in your life, ask yourself, well, is it controllable? Is this something that I can fix right now? If it is something that you can fix, then fix it, right? And then guess what? You will be happy. Is the leaky faucet driving you crazy? Go fix it, and then then you'll be happy. You actually fixed it, and now it's not a problem anymore. Yeah. Right. Or is it an uncontrollable situation, right? That you can't control. These are a little more challenging because his only conclusion is that you have to learn to accept it, right? If you can't change it, you have to accept it. And that's a hard, and I'm not going to, and I haven't done enough research to understand, like, how do you accept the hardships and realities of life? I do know that from other psychological readings that it does work. Like an example being, I heard from this one other psychologist, he was interviewing rape victims, right? Yeah. People that you can imagine had the most traumatic experience that one can experience. And it was beyond their control, right? But what they learned is through therapy sessions, the faster and more in-depth the person could get in a retelling of what happened to them and what were the events that led up to them, and the more descriptive they could tell about exactly what the rape did to them, how it affected them mentally and physically, down to the smells of the perpetrator and all this horrible stuff, the more they could retell it, the faster they could heal. Wow. And so because a lot of times what people want to do when they experience something very traumatic is they want to suppress it, right? And your brain will actually do that naturally. It's one of the reasons why schizophrenia comes about, is because the brain will actually, if you can't deal with a terrible situation, your brain will fracture, in almost in a literal sense, that it will isolate that, almost like I think of it as like a cancer. Your body will try to separate this part of you from the rest of it because the harm it causes is too great. It prevents you from functioning in society. So schizophrenia, and it's almost in a way a protective mechanism of your own brain to defend itself from the harsh realities that it can't accept, right? But the way you work through that is by accepting it, by talking about it. And in a way, you can bring back power to yourself, to the situation, by talking about it.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't have to be as extreme as that case, but this is true for every individual, for the things that drive us crazy in our day. The faster you can recognize the feeling of bitterness growing inside you, the faster you can recognize those negative emotions that you're feeling inside you. The faster you can recognize it, the faster you can address it. The faster you address it, the faster you'll work through it. You'll process it. I just was having a discussion with my daughter last night over this very thing. She was upset because she was upset at herself because she lied to her mom. She lied to my wife, and it was something very minor, like the TV channel changed, and my wife was like, hey, what happened to the TV? She's like, I don't know. And it was very obvious, like she was the only one in the room. It's like, did you change the channel? No, I didn't change the channel. And of course it's like, well, of course you did, because I can change it back, and it didn't change by itself.
Right.
You know? And so it was such a minor thing, but I mean, it just destroyed my daughter, like, because she knew that she had lied, and she knew that she had effectively been caught in the lie.
Yeah.
And so my wife was just like, hey, she just kind of worked. My wife was just kind of thought it was, knew she had lied, but thought it was the end of it, right? And she comes to check back on her later, and she just completely ignores my wife. Just won't respond to her. She won't respond to her mom at all, right? And this went on for a day. And so that's why last night I was like, we're going to have a talk about this, because you're ignoring people. What's going on? And she's just like, well, I'm mad about myself. I'm upset with myself. And we're like, why are you upset? And then she realized, well, I'm mad at myself because I lied. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm glad you're talking about this now, but why didn't you tell, mommy that you're not mad at her? We all do this, where we get upset and we take it out on other people.
That's true.
Right. And we don't mean to take it out on other people, but it affects them inevitably, because we have these like invisible connections between each other, and we can't read minds. And so we make assumptions. We assume, oh, well, they're mad at me. Right. And so I told her, I was like, look, if you're struggling internally with something going on, and someone asks, hey, are you okay? Don't just respond with, like everybody does, with, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right. That's a lie. Right. Don't lie to yourself, and don't lie to other people. What you can say instead is say, hey, it's not you. I'm not upset with you. I'm upset with me. I'm just wrestling with something right now. Right. I'm struggling with something. Hey, that's great, because now you've not disconnected those relationships with other people, which as we've discussed, you need. Right. I said, all right, first off, the first thing I want you to do is make sure you communicate with other people that you're not upset with them, you're upset with yourself. Second is, I want you to do some homework if you want to deal with this on your own. I want you to identify the root problem. You need to put a name to what it is that's bothering you. You need to be very explicit. What is the emotion I'm feeling? What caused that emotion? What were the events that led up to it? Right. And then you need to figure out how to fix it. Right. There's got to be some redemption. There's got to be some reconciliation here. If you lied, how do you fix a lie? You tell the truth. You confess.
Yeah.
And that's one part of it, is you confess to other people. And then there's the last part of it, which is equally as important, is you got to forgive yourself. Right. The whole idea of loving others as thyself, right? You have to forgive yourself too. So anyways, that was kind of a summation of Mo Gadot's happiness solution. Is, in summary, your happiness is equal to or greater than the difference between the events of your life and your expectations of how life should behave. Right. So we're going to kind of get into the mind-body aspect of it. I know we're running out of time. I love this stuff.
No, we got about 20 minutes, man.
Okay, good. All right. So next up is Chad Ming Tane's happiest man on earth. So Ming Tang was another Google researcher. Same thing. It's always ironic to me that these are people that are very intelligent, very wealthy, but then they struggle with happiness just like everybody else. It should tell you something that money does not buy happiness, which I loved. Although I say that, I love Daniel Tosh's illustration where he's making fun of that. He's like, yeah, people who say that have never ridden on a Sea-Doo. He's like, have you ever seen a poor person? He's like, you can't be unhappy on a Sea-Doo, riding, try to be mad, and you crank up that speed and the water's spraying in your face. Oh, you're just laughing and smiling,
That is true. I can't argue with that.
I always think that in my head. But anyways, okay, so Ming Tang, he wanted to know the same question as Mogadat of what makes people happy. And he took it a step further, and he said, let's stick people in an MRI machine, and let's study their brains to see what makes people happy. And so he got lots of people, and they basically said, all right, try to think about the happiest thing you could think about. That makes you happy. And they did this for several people, and people were like, I thought about, my loved ones. I thought about the year I won the baseball tournament, and won the football game for my school, and thought about my dog and that kind of stuff. And then he had one guy named Matthew Ricard, who's a French guy who had a PhD in genetic chemistry, and ended up abandoning all of that to pursue Buddhism. He went and studied for like 6 years in the Buddhist temples. And Matthew Ricard gets in the machine, and he's in there, and his MRI scan lights up. I mean, his happiness levels are off the chart. And the way they measured happiness was they knew that the left prefrontal cortex has a higher, it lights up differently than the rest of the part of the brain whenever you experience feelings of happiness.
Okay.
And so that's how they were measuring happiness is basically studying brain images of parts of the brain that light up differently. But this Matthew guy, I mean, his was off the charts. I mean, it lit up like a Christmas tree. And so they were like, oh, they get him out. And they're like, what in the world is this guy thinking about when they get him out? So, that you would think, like, what were you thinking about? Something naughty? Like, well, what was it that you were thinking about? And he was like, actually, I was thinking about compassion. And so one of the things that Matthew Ricard brought to people's understanding is the idea of compassion meditation, right? So love and compassion meditation. So we'll talk a little bit about meditation, because this is all part of the, we talked about at the very beginning that it's not just internal or not just external. There is a part of this that's internal. Yeah. It's not just your connections to reality, but also your perceptions of reality, right? So Matthew Ricard, he explains, his whole stuff can be summed up into three couple of things. He focuses on, we'll talk about some meditation, like mindfulness meditation. So, and I practice this with my daughter, she has some anxiety issues and stuff like that. And the way mindfulness works, mindfulness meditation is you sit calmly, and they often say, focus on your breathing. The reason why they say focus on your breathing is because they're trying to cut off you're trying to reroute the circuitry in your brain to focus on one specific thing, right? So focusing on your breathing is one of the easiest things to do, right? But you can expand mindfulness meditation by thinking about your surroundings. Well, and there's usually like a couple of things that you can focus on. Name three things that you hear right now, right? Well, I hear the fan. I hear, the feedback in my headphones. I hear kind of the buzzing of the light on my desk, right? Very small things, but just focusing on those things, you're immediately getting your mind off of whatever it is that was plaguing your mind to begin with, right? Those negative thoughts and feelings that are coming from those negative feelings coming from those negative thoughts, right? So you're forcing your brain to focus on something else besides that, right? You're trying to control your brain. You're controlling your mind by controlling your thoughts by mindfulness, where, like I said, you're focusing on what do you hear? What do you feel, right? I feel the weight of my chair right now that I'm sitting in. I feel the hunger pains in my stomach because I haven't eaten breakfast yet. At the same time, I feel the coffee running through my system that's cleaning me out, right? I feel these things. If I focus on them enough, that's what mindfulness is you're focusing on what do you hear? What do you feel? What do you see right now? Open your eyes. Don't close them. Look around the room.
So it's really sort of sensefulness, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're utilizing your senses to regain control of your thoughts, right? Because this is where the mind-body connection is starting to come in. We'll talk more about that in a second. So anyway, so that's mindfulness meditation is basically, here's how you disconnect from those thoughts. And, they talk about centering yourself. It's basically, here's how you bring yourself, or grounding, you're bringing yourself back to earth, bringing yourself back to the present where you are here right now. Sometimes we get plagued about the past. What about that stupid mistake you made in the past, and you just keep replaying that on loop, and it just drive yourself crazy. And
I can see people do this. It's interesting to watch somebody that's having anxiety problems in the moment is because they're stuck in a loop. They just keep rolling through the same tape over and over and over again and can't get out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or they focus on the future of what might happen.
Right.
And they chase a million rabbits in a million different directions, and they just are paralyzed in fear of all the possible negative things that could happen. Right. And it's like, whoa, stop that. And if you and people struggle with this, how do you disconnect? It's like, well, you disconnect by grounding yourself, focusing on the very present you are right here and right now.
Yeah.
That's why I love that saying, it's why they call it a present, is because it's it's a present. It's a gift, right? The present is a present, right? So anyways, that's mindfulness meditation, or they otherwise known as like concentration meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is visualization meditation. Visualization is something that like sports athletes are really big on. They don't realize it's called this visualization meditation, but it's the same thing. It's basically like picture yourself what if it goes right.
Yeah.
Right. What would have to happen for things to go right? And just visualizing that in your head. It's almost like a fantasy daydreaming kind of thing, right? But you're trying to keep it realistic, but you're playing it out in a positive light, visualizing what it is that you want. What is it that you want, and how are you going to get to it? How are you going to achieve it? And how are you going to feel when you do get it? How are you going to feel in the process of getting that, achieving that goal, right? So that's visualization meditation. And then lastly, the one that brings about the most feelings of love or of happiness in us is love and compassion meditation. So compassion is by definition co-suffering, right?
Okay.
Co-passion, right? The idea is that you're having that empathetic connection with somebody. You're thinking about somebody who's actually hurting, right? And this is where it gets really weird, in my opinion, is because you're thinking about the hurt that someone else is experiencing, and you're thinking about how they feel in that moment, and you actually start to feel sad and hurt for them too in that moment. But then you start thinking about what would alleviate that suffering, what would alleviate that pain. Maybe it is just a simple hand holding. Maybe it is a simple hug. Maybe it is you bring them. How would it feel if you brought them dinner if they're sick, right? How would they? So you start thinking about those means in which you're hurting with them, but then you also start thinking about how would you show them love, and what would be the response that they give in return, right? How do you think? And you're visualizing how they would feel. How would you feel if you were experiencing that same thing? Right? If you're struggling with understanding that idea of co-suffering, taking a moment and thinking about how would you feel, you would probably feel the same way, putting yourself in their shoes, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. So you're trying to almost meld your minds together, right? You're trying to put yourself in the same position, hurt like they hurt, but at the same time, then you're trying to help them, and by helping them in your mind, you will in turn help yourself. Right? Now, to take that a step further, which is why the East philosophies fail, is that you've got to bring it into manifestation, into reality.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just to think about doing good. That doesn't change the world. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make the world a better place by living inside your head. You actually can manifest good in reality. Right? One last thing about Ming Tang, what he had talked about is or Matthew Ricard, was about hope and fear. He basically said our primal thoughts stem from those two functions. Basically, we're either living in hope or we're living under fear, right? And all other motivations kind of stem from those things, which I thought was pretty insightful, because we as Christians would define that as, well, it's true, you're either living under fear or you're living under faith.
Yeah.
Right? Because faith is a hope for that which isn't seen, which is Hebrews 11.
Yeah, man.
Right. So anyway, so we're kind of wrapping these things up. Some people who had studied some tribes, right? We're talking about remote people. We're talking about Western first world problems. Like, what are we dealing with here in the West and dealing with all these first world problems? Some people, they love studying ancient tribes that still exist today, who are disconnected from Western culture, Western society, don't have buildings and skyscrapers and all the conveniences that we have in our society. And they want to know, they're great to study, because we want to know, like, well, how do they feel about things? What do they think? What do they feel? And so there was this one guy who was a missionary, and he actually wanted to go, take the gospel to this remote tribe. And he starts talking to them and trying to share them about Jesus and stuff like that. And he talked to them about one of the reasons why he was sharing. One of the things that impacted his life so greatly was his mom committed suicide. Mm-hmm. And he was retelling to this tribe that, about how his mom committed suicide, and they just busted out laughing. And he was kind of taken back, or very taken back. Like, what in the world? Why are you laughing about this terrible situation? And they were just like, why on earth would anybody kill themselves? How stupid is that?
Oh man, wow. It's so unbelievable that the only reaction is to laugh at it.
Yes. They laugh at the absurdity of thinking your life is so bad that you would take it. That's just unconscionable, or whatever. I can't say the word. It was just hilarious, because I've often said this about in Western culture about, or stay-at-home moms sometimes, is that, when you have nothing to worry about, you worry about everything.
Truth. Yep.
and I feel like that's what happens, is that all of our basic needs are met.
Yeah.
And so because all of our basic needs are met, we panic about everything. We just invent stuff to panic about, right? And invent stuff to become stressed out about.
Well, it's like if all your needs are met, then it's hard to imagine anything happening in the future except that your needs not being met.
Right.
And which is scarier in your imagination than it ever really is in reality.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was another guy who went, and he wanted to ask these tribal people the big questions of life. Like, what do you think happens when you die? What is the meaning of life? What brings you happiness? What do you most fear? He was thinking, like, I'm going to get some profound answers from this remote tribe. And he goes in, and he has a translator with him, and he asks them those questions. He's like, what is the greatest thing in life? And the guy just looks at him. He's like, meat. Meat is the greatest thing in life. And he's just like, okay, all right, well, what do you fear most in life? He's like, thinks for a moment. He's like, lions.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of lions. They'll eat you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or elephants. They'll step on you.
Right. Right.
Just real problems, not these made up problems that we have in our heads.
It's funny. It's like, I would think, man, how terrible would that be if lions and elephants squashing you were real concerns? But then these are the people that laughed at the idea of killing oneself.
Right.
Which is pretty crazy if you think about it. I mean, wow.
It's so crazy. It's like, what? There actually is some learning. There's some insights.
Which is why this is exactly why we need to reintroduce megafauna to the continental United States. Is so we can have a real problem to focus on instead of an imaginary one, and we'll be much happier.
Megafauna, you mean like dinosaurs?
Yeah, dinosaurs, elephants, lions, wolves, whatever. Large, dangerous animals that might actually kill you. That's the secret to happiness. You figured it out. It's the secret to happiness.
Well, I was going to go down this last path. I said I was going to wrap things up, talking about finishing off with the mind-body connection.
Okay.
So you could fear for your life, yes. And that would present you with a reason, surprisingly enough, to fight for your survival. You people who are homeless, the people that you would think most likely to commit themselves don't. They actually want to live, which is really surprising to most people. And the people that do kill themselves, that's actually a wealthy person's a disease, or a wealthy person cause of death. Is wealthy people kill themselves, not poor people.
Interesting.
So what is going on? What is it? And I think I don't have the full answer here, but I think there's a couple of people that are on to the right path. And it's people like Wim Hof or Prahlad. So these are people that they're testing the limits of the human body, right? So Wim Hof is this guy. He's this Dutch guy that he's set all these world records. He's like the Iceman, polar bear man. He's the guy that can basically spend enormous amounts of time in freezing cold water and not die.
Yeah.
Right. He so much so control over his body that he can control his body temperature and not die by being in freezing cold water. And so he's developed this weird practice. It's basically two things, basically ice baths or ice bathing, cold showers, that kind of thing, and breathing techniques, right? And his breathing technique is not so much just about getting oxygen in, but also oxygen deprivation, right? The idea being his breathing exercises, you take about 30 deep breaths, breathe in through your nose, breathe out, right? You're trying to hyperventilate to some degree, trying to get enough oxygen up to your brain, and then you're going to exhale and hold it. You're going to hold it for up to 90 seconds. You're going to exhale and hold it. Okay. Right? And you're going to do that, and you can I haven't been able to get to 90 seconds. I can get to about a minute of after exhaling, holding my breath. Yeah. And then he's like, you're fighting your flesh. You're fighting your body. Your mind is trying to fight your body. This is a highly stressful event, as you can imagine, because you're suffocating yourself effectively. Right. Right. But what you're doing is you're bringing yourself between the conscious and the unconscious, right? Because breathing is both a conscious and an unconscious activity, right? You're trying to bridge the two. You're trying to get it right to the very edge. And so he said, and naturally, you're going to inhale, right? Your body will not let you, keep make you pass out. Right. And so you'll inhale a deep breath. He's like, take that deep breath in and then hold that for another 30 seconds, right? And just embrace it, because now at this point you've deprived your brain of oxygen. You've experienced this extremely stressful event, and now you've also realized you're not dead. You're still alive, right? That's why so many people who have these near-death experiences come back and they're like, almost have like a out-of-body experience. They're like, just love life, and stuff like they've now brought themselves back to the point of from going from death to appreciating life. And that's essentially, I think, what he's doing. That's what you're doing by forcing yourself under these enormous amounts of stresses, right? That's what these people are doing that are living these lives, because you often associate people like the Buddhists and stuff like that of being like at peace, right? And being happy and being content, right? We talked about Matthew Ricard, right? They practice this of stressing the body intentionally, right? It has to be voluntary too. There's been all these other psychological studies that have shown that you can't involuntarily stress the person out, otherwise it literally kills them. Like in Auschwitz or something like that. Yeah. But if you voluntarily take on the challenge of taking an ice bath or taking an ice cold shower, or voluntarily taking these breathing exercises, or I had mentioned Prahlad, he's a Jainist. What he can do is live off allegedly he can live off of just sunlight.
I've seen this dude.
They've done studies on this guy, and they've so much so that the Indian Defense Department, they wanted to study him, and they basically isolated him into a room and he could exit the room and get some sunbathing, and that was it. And they studied him for a month, and he didn't die. Wow. and so they were like, eventually they gave up because like, this is too dangerous. I don't know how he's doing.
Did he have water?
But no water, no food, no water.
Weird.
Right? And another person thought that's BS. He had to have been getting someone sneaking water or something to him in the side, off camera, something, because he was being filmed during this time too. And they said there's no possible way. So they did it again. They tested him again, and a guy was just like, I'm gonna freaking live with you just to see how you do this, for a year. just to observe it's possible. And he never saw him like sneak off and now he would drink some water.
Yeah.
He wasn't opposed to drinking that all the time, but he could go for up to like 20 days without water. He definitely observed him without getting water for 21 days, which is unheard of, which is seemingly impossible. Just like Wim Hof, it's seemingly impossible for you to get in freezing cold water and not experience hypothermia after so many minutes. But this guy can do it.
I believe that because I've done the cold water stuff before. It's been a while, but I went on this retreat with a couple guys, and one of the things that we did was in the middle of the night, we sat down in this icy cold mountain stream that was, and it was cold outside, and we just sat there, and the object of it was to just break through the wall. And eventually, it's true. You break through the wall, and your metabolism kicks in, and you just start burning fat to keep yourself warm. And if your head's in the right place, you can do it. And I don't remember how long we sat there. It was a long time that we just sat in this freezing cold water. And eventually we got out and stood around a campfire and warmed back up. But that really changed my thinking on like what a human being is capable of when I actually felt myself sort of break through that wall of being cold. And it's like, oh, I'm not going to die. Like I can sit here for a long time and I'm going to be okay.
Right.
It was wild.
And that euphoric sensation you experience when you have that breakthrough, right? Or right after it, because you thought in the moment, you feel like I'm going to die. I'm going to freeze to death, or I'm going to pass out because I can't hold my breath this long. You're hyper stressing your body out. Like your cortisol levels are skyrocketing in that very moment. You're voluntarily inducing stress, right? But as soon as you take that breath, as soon as you realize I'm not going to die, I'm not going to freeze to death, or you go periods without food and you realize I'm not going to die. And you say to yourself, like, I'm voluntarily doing this. I can choose to go eat if I want to.
Yeah.
Right. But when you do that, you push through these barriers and you're like, I don't want to die. I'm not going to die. Right. And it transforms you literally down to the DNA level. They've actually done studies and they show that by self-stressing basically is what we're doing here, is you're actually turning on your DNA is actually kicking on different triggers within your body. You are fundamentally changing yourself when you do this. You are literally transforming yourself from your mind into your body.
That reminds me of a rat study I heard about recently on I think it was Huberman Labs, maybe. It was a science show. And he was talking about they took two rats and each cage had a wheel in it. And the one rat would go in whenever he wanted to and just exercise in the wheel. But the other rat was like forced to do the exercise that the first rat was doing. So his wheel was motorized and he would get like stuck in it and have to exercise whenever the first rat was exercising. So he was doing it by force, but they were getting the same amount of exercise. The first rat that was doing it willingly got all the physical benefits of the exercise, but the second rat was just stressed out all the time and was kind of sickened by the experience and didn't get the physical benefits of the exercise, even though they were doing the same task. And it sort of speaks to that idea is like you're doing this to yourself willingly, and that's a key component of the benefits. Yes. Whereas if you like stick somebody in a concentration camp, it's not going to make them, they're going to have a hard time benefiting from that.
Right. It doesn't make you stronger. It breaks you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. If you choose to go to the gym, yes, you will get physically stronger, but you're developing your mind.
Yeah.
By choosing to do this. This is why exercise is one of the best ways to defeat depression and sadness is by physically exercising. Even more so if you physically exercise outside, in nature. Going out for a run through the woods or going for a hike in the woods is enormously beneficial to your mind.
Yeah, dude, you're right. That's cool.
So I guess the only thing I could say is, as you set off on this, trying to practice these things, trying to practice gratitude, trying to practice meditation and mindfulness and visualization and love and compassion meditation, trying to think about other people while you do that, and then living it out.
Yeah.
By finding a way, because if you try to go help other people, it can hurt.
Yeah.
You.
It can. Yeah.
But if you do it voluntarily and you experience that stress voluntarily, like, it will transform you. It not only will transform you, but you will actually transform the world. And some other closing thoughts is that, as you go on this journey, this process of transforming yourself and transforming the world, I've heard it said, don't compare down, don't compare up. In other words, don't compare yourself to other people of where other people are right now. Compare to where you are. Compare against yourself yesterday.
Yeah.
Are you 1% better today than you were yesterday?
Yeah.
Of achieving your goals, of putting these things into practice.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, you can really indict social media on that point, because the whole point of social media is comparing yourself to other people and not yourself. Like,
Right.
nobody goes through their own timeline. You know what I mean? They're looking at other people's stuff, right? And I think that not it prevents you from sort of meditating on how your life has changed or how you've grown as a person, or the things that you can be thankful for. You're seeing the things that other people are happy about.
Yep,
So yeah,
absolutely.
Cool. Well, number 15, CEO of Earth. It's been a really good show, and I've really enjoyed having you on. You got any closing remarks?
I was trying to find an ending poem, right? Because I opened my poem. Basically, it was from Where the Sidewalk Ends. Shel Silverstein. His poem. So I guess if I were to end, I would use one of his other poems. It was The Invitation. So if you were a dreamer, come in. If you're a dreamer, a wisher, a liar, a hoper, a prayer, a magic bean buyer. If you're a pretender, come sit by my fire. For we have some flax golden tales to spin. Come in, come in.
That's good stuff, man. Now, number 15, I'll congratulate you on taking the high road and not vindicating all your positions that so often get pooped on this show. You did.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll come back on, and I'll just have that flat out debate.
Yeah,
with,
you guys can fight it out. It'll be great.
Yeah. He needs to have someone challenge him.
There you go. Number 15's coming to regulate.